To the journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And um, for some of you that have been listeners, you know that what we do is we tell stories of transformation, and not only in the midst of that transformation, but sharing what obstacles or setbacks someone may have experienced. And then what things did they learn as they were moving through and those obstacles or those setbacks that someone had. And today we have a special guest, Alex Gary. Alex and I have known each other, well, goes way back to high school. And Alex was a previous in the very first year. Um, you were on the show then and talked about what you were doing at that time. And our daughters were in musicals together, and so there's been a lot of time periods over the past uh, couple decades that our paths have crossed as well. So welcome back to the journey, Alex. And
It's nice talking again. That was
yeah,
pre-COVID.
yes, it was. Yeah, when the world was a little bit different, right? So
Yes.
so I know. Well, why don't you kind of just let the audience know a little bit about you, how your ties are within the community, going all the way back to our Harlem days, and some of your interests and passions.
All right. You and I graduated. Well, you were a year ahead of me, right? You're a class
Yep,
of '86 at Harlem, and I
correct.
graduated from Harlem in '87. And then I had a circuitous journey in college, but I ended up graduating from NIU. And in 1996, I started working for the Rockford Register Star, and I did that for, oh gosh, 17 years. So that takes us up to about 2013, 2014, when the newspaper was on its way down rapidly, and they eliminated me, um, and which is kind of like led me to your first podcast, because it's been a lot of fits and starts, and um, different ideas and trying different things, because I pretty much thought I'd live in journalism for the rest of my life. And when the newspaper let me go, I had to make a decision. If I wanted to stay in the journalism path, I had to leave town. And my daughters at the time, were still in teenagers, so and I'd have to move away from them, because
Yeah.
my ex-wife and I weren't together. So I wasn't going to do that. So I had to stay in town and figure out different things. So, interestingly, when you and I talked back in 2019, I had just finished working for a company downtown. That had worked for a while, but then it kind of, the company was on its way out. And um, at the time, I was launching a new idea to do alumni research and development for public schools. And I'm still doing that. But just in the last 2 months, a new opportunity's come up. So I am now the development director for Midway Village Museum
Oh,
over here, just off Guilford Road.
perfect. And for listeners that may not be familiar with Midway Village, explain a little bit about what is Midway Village, what's the history of Midway Village, how long has it been in existence? Yeah.
So Midway Village, interesting. Our 50th anniversary is coming up. So it was Midway Village opened in 1974. A family purchased some land because they thought this family was part of the Erlanger Home Society, and that was a two-story museum. And this family's like, we need a single-story museum to tell the whole history. And so they purchased some land, and then they partnered with three historical societies to raise money. And the museum opened in 1974 on, I think, 13 acres. It's now 144 acres. We have an indoor museum um, that we're constantly working on. There's a Victorian village with about 26 buildings out and back, which hosts all kinds of different events during the year. And then we have a bunch of land all the way out to Perryville, where we do special war reenactments. So now it's up to 144 acres. And I've been here 6 weeks now. I thought I knew the operations pretty well, but it's there's a lot going on a weekly basis, especially during wedding season. You're talking March to November. There's just dozens of different kinds of events going on, plus the regular museum and all these other things we're trying to do.
Nice, nice. And so it is actually now with that, with the museum, maybe talk a little bit about what does the museum actually focus on? Where you said there was a Victorian village aspect with 26 buildings, but what does the, if a person was coming to the museum for the first time, what would they see? What would some of the things that they'd see?
So the Victorian Village focuses on 1890 to 1910, and that doesn't, the buildings don't change, right?
Yeah,
So,
yep, yep.
that's kind of stuck in its time period. Here, um, the one of the things about the museum is we're trying to make it. That's going to be the goal, is to freshen it up. When you come in to the right, you'll see a little gift store, and the lady running the gift store, has a charge to try to tie everything in the gift store back to Rockford history. So that's changed over the last couple of years. And if you went in there a couple of years ago, it was just little kitschy items that we're trying to sell. But now we're actually trying to have everything in there tie back to Rockford history in some way. And my mom used to run a stained glass store and a retail store, so I've had some ideas, and we're working together on a few things. In fact, I'm wearing, the Camp Grant hoodie that we just started offering through a pop-up store. So there's some things going on there. Then when you turn left and go into the museum, you start out with some, pictures of the old time Rockford on the wall. There's some stuff about the peaches. There's stuff about sock monkeys. We have a main hallway, which is kind of eclectic. It has a lot of different items, and it leads to the very, very back where we have an industrial gallery. But the industrial gallery hasn't really been touched since the 1980s. We still have AMROC stuff in there. And AMROC hasn't been a thing here locally since like 2005. So that's on our list of things to improve. We do have a really cool exhibit called Many Faces, One Community. Off to the left, that's newer. That was built, I think, around 2008. And that's the theme is all these different communities of people have come together to make Rockford. So it's kind of a trip through a train station where you go through a Swedish house, an Italian kitchen, a boarding house. It's a pretty cool exhibit, and it's something you would see in like the Chicago, New York museums. And that's kind of what we want the whole museum to eventually be, is to that level. Right now, my number one job is we're creating a standalone permanent exhibit for Camp Grant, which, Kevin, do you know the history of Camp Grant?
No, a little bit, but not probably just enough to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah,
Right.
tell us about it.
So interestingly, you remember MASH? Like, we're old enough to have watched MASH,
Oh yeah,
right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Colonel Potter trained for World War I at Camp Grant, fictionally.
Sure, sure.
Camp Grant opened in 1917 on what the land now is Greater Rockford Airport, or the Chicago Rockford International Airport. So that whole area was a World War I training camp. And then in between the wars, it was, I think, for the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, which was, a Roosevelt thing. And then in World War II, when we were getting ready for World War II, it reopened as a World War II basic training camp and expanded. In World War II, we had over 300,000 soldiers cycle through Camp Grant at some point. So, lots of people from all over the country called Rockford home for a little bit of time, thanks to Camp Grant. And then after the war ended, I mean, there were thousands of buildings out there. They built this whole thing in like 6 months. So everybody in town that could swing a hammer was, at the area, out there at that area, building buildings. And then in World War II, when it ended, they basically sold everything off or gave it away. So, everything was cleared out in about a year. And then they turned it over to the Greater Rockford Airport Authority, which then in 1954 opened up an airport. So Camp Grant has this long-lasting ties. Back in World War I, when the World War I started, we had less than 200 Black families in Rockford. But during World War I, 6,000 African-American troops were trained at Camp Grant and headed off to Europe. A lot of those families or people, they came back to this area for economic opportunity. And that's when the Great Migration started. So Booker Washington Center opened to service the African-American troops in World War I. and
Interesting.
it's been around ever since. So, you know, Camp Grant has a long-standing ties, and we a couple of years ago, this thing called the Command Post Restaurant shut down and had a bunch of Camp Grant stuff, and they held an auction, and we bought quite a bit of items there. And so now we want to create a permanent Camp Grant exhibit, to, you know, draw World War II enthusiasts here.
Sure, sure. So, and I know obviously one of the big things is that World War II days in September, end of September at Midway Village. Do they have World War I days too, or just World War II?
No, they've had World War one days for years as well. It's not as big. So last year they decided not to do it. There's
I,
been a couple of years when it, you know, if it rains really hard, you lost money on that one. But we had so many people ask to bring it back that it's back on the schedule.
is it?
So there's three war related things that we do every year here. There's Civil War Days, and that's a weekday thing where a bunch of schools and dozens of schools from Wisconsin, Illinois, from, you know, the burbs, bring classes in, and over a 5-day stretch, we have a bunch of reenactors in, you know, talking about the Civil War. So we've got a Lincoln, we've got a Frederick Douglass, we've got, you know, we've got um, U.S. Grant walking around. So that we do that, and then we're bringing back World War I days, and then of course in the fall and in September and October, we do World War II days. And this year, you know, 5,500 visitors over 2 days. More than 1,000 reenactors and 300 volunteers. I mean,
Wow.
it's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, well, I live less than a mile away. It's
Mhm.
and we know when it's happening because
Yeah, the cannon's going. Yeah.
the cannon's going off, and it's a pretty, it's like you said, it's been, I mean, we've lived in that house now 20 years, and so
Mhm.
it's a big deal, you
Yeah.
know, and a lot of people, and I've gone to it a couple times, a handful of times, and so
Mhm.
but yeah, we always know when it's happening. So
Yeah.
so going back to and again how that ties into this time period. Now maybe I got this right, maybe not, but was it during Camp Grant when it was first opened up for World War One, the Spanish flu was going on,
That
and
is that is the tragedy of Camp Grant. When
yeah,
so it opened in 1917, and then we were trained. You know, that it was fully operational in 1918 when the Spanish flu hit, and over 3,000 troops died. I mean, in a 6-week period, because they're all sardined together, right, in the same barracks, and you know the whole cleanliness. You know, people, you didn't have the same kind of ways to keep things clean as you do now. And yeah, if you go back into the history, there that was a tragedy. We had just people dying by the hundreds every day for about a 6-week period, and then it magically went away.
yeah, and I remember somebody, again, I don't remember exactly where I heard that, but because there was a huge fear regarding the townspeople of Rockford, and that impacting the townspeople,
Hmm.
and so and then when you said it like it seemed to magically disappear, what's any ideas about how it, I mean, obviously it came in because that's what viruses do, and we just have gone through that with the pandemic, or the corona pandemic, but any idea from your
No, not really. I mean, you know, typically cold and flu season gets worse as it gets colder because you're stuck inside.
yeah.
Uh, I'm not sure exactly, you know, what happened, but it was just like it peaked, and then it just kind of, you know, that year just kind of petered out. But for about a 6-week stretch there, Pat Cunningham from the paper wrote about it. You know, they were stacking up coffins because the funeral homes couldn't handle the amount of people dying on a daily basis.
Very, very unfortunate. Very unfortunate.
Mhm.
What's the timeline regarding the Camp Grant exhibit? Do you guys have any ideas when
Yeah,
that's going to be?
we hired a company, the same company that designed the Many Faces One Community exhibit. We hired them to do the same thing. So you would walk in, and it's you're walking into the, you know, to the mess hall. I mean, we've got a great little kind of layout set out, and we have a World War II Jeep ready to go, and all these items, and it's going to be a really high quality thing, but which means you have to raise a lot of money. I mean, one
Yeah.
one of the issues about museums in general, um, when you walk through the main hallway, some of our stuff is really high quality, and some of us put on white foam board. You know, we're like, okay, we want to change things up. We don't have a lot of money for a new thing, so we're just going to do this, this, and this. And that's down the road one of the things we want to change. If you want to get people into your museum on a, you know, more than once every 10 years, you have to give them a really high quality experience. So we've been visiting other museums kind of to get an idea what high quality experience means. And so this will have the timeline starting in 1917. It'll talk a lot about the African American troops that were here. And then we have some ideas on how to make it interactive. And one of our board members went to the Titanic Museum. If you go to the Titanic Museum, they give you a name, right? And you go through the whole Titanic exhibit, and at the end you type in your name or you enter your ticket, right? And they tell you if that person lived or died. Right.
Okay.
So, you know, that's kind of a cool thing. You know, we're working on getting records of everybody who came through Camp Grant. It would be cool to, okay, so Kevin, you show up, here's your name, and you know, you do your interactive thing and you go to the end, and then you find out what happened to him. Did he die in the war? Did they survive? Things like that. You know, you and I are sports fans.
Yep.
One of the things I'm individually researching is for those 4 years in World War II, this town was a sports mecca because of Camp Grant. You had so many outstanding college students in the Army that we fielded baseball teams, basketball teams, football teams. Our football team played Big Ten schedule. They played Illinois, Wisconsin, Purdue, Indiana, then they would play the other base teams. One of the years, the basketball team was so good that at the end of the season, it was the number 4 ranked amateur team in the country, behind North Carolina, another school, and then another base team. You know, because these guys, you know, when you're here, you know, there was no TV back then, right? Yeah. You know, so you're not going to sit around the radio. So they had these guys constantly in motion, forming teams and doing athletic events. So in 1942, the Chicago Bears played the Camp Grant Warriors at the Bell Bowl. Yeah, as a preseason. Yeah. So yeah, I like looking that stuff up. We've had, you know, these people from all over the country were here, and we want to reach out to the family members of these people that competed and went here to see if they'll contribute, because we need to raise, I think, a total of 525,000. So we've raised about 160 so far. We need 380,000 to begin construction, but then we want to raise another 150 or so that we have, you know, money every year to maintain the exhibit and change it up, because we don't, you know, we want it to be not just, you know, trinkets in a box that you walk around and look at, but like the whole interactive, you know, experience on the walls and stuff like that.
Sure. No, it sounds awesome. I mean, I love history. So that's a pretty cool thing. And maybe it's the one exhibit that already exists, but it hasn't been updated for a long time. Rockford's got, you know, a long history as far as, you know, furniture manufacturing to fastener to now aerospace. What are they thinking about doing with that? Or is that after the Camp Grant?
Well, it's after the Camp Grant, but we started having some discussions. We want to do it in a similar fashion. The timeline of, you know, this was an agricultural town, and then the Manny Reaper came along, and we have a Manny Reaper, which, like, I'm actually going to do a video on that. And that was the beginning of these huge giant combines. You know, started here in Rockford. A guy got a patent to make a thing that could actually, you know, cut down crops, because instead of doing it by hand. Right. And that began the Industrial Revolution here. And then we became this massive furniture making. You know, the Swedes moved to town, and we became this huge furniture making company. And at the end of the 1920s, we were the number 2 furniture making company in America. Only Grand Rapids was bigger. And then, you know, then the Great Depression hit, wiped all those companies out. I mean, we were on our backs all throughout the 30s. And then World War II comes along, and all of these companies that were just limping along became World War II suppliers. And 2 of them, Sunstrand and Woodward, you know, transitioned into making parts for airplanes. And so then that started, you know, that saved a lot of our industry. We became a screw making capital, you know, for 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then now that's kind of transitioned out, and now we're this aerospace hub. Right. We want to tell that story in kind of a timeline fashion. The way it was set up, I think, in the 80s was we got a lot of companies to come in and donate money, and then they put up stuff about their company. So
Mm.
there's no real unified theme there.
Sure, sure.
We want to change that up and go more into like, again, a journey through time,
Yeah.
and have some of the, have some of the cool things. We've had a lot of cool inventions that came out of Rockford that really changed, the arc of this community, and we want to show that off. So the difference is, are we going to do it like we're doing Camp Grant, where we raise money for one specific room, or because there's a thought here, why don't we just try to raise a chunk of money to redo the whole center part, right, leading back to there? Because one of our weaknesses here, we don't have a lot of pop culture stuff. Rockford's had a few people make it to the big time. We only have one thing on Cheap Trick in the whole museum, right? We have a little bit of stuff on Janet Lynn, but that's about it. We've had people win Grammy Awards, and we've had people appear in movies, and but none of that's really here.
Sure.
So there's a lot to do, and I am also a history buff, so
Yep, yep.
it's a cool thing for me. It's like, what, if there were 5 places on my list of things that could keep me in Rockford, this was one of the 5. So the whole story about me getting here is pretty cool, because it all came together really quickly.
Yeah. So yeah, no, just to your point, I mean, thinking about how many individuals that we have in professional sports right now, is amazing.
Yeah.
It,
One of my ideas, I'm not much of a card collector anymore. I pretty much sold all my stuff to our old coach, Bill Gerling. But yeah, there's a lot of people over time that made it out of Rockford and made it into the big time. And I'm like, well, that we could do a display on that.
Yep.
And so, Bill Gerling and Judge Patrick Yarborough and I are working on a project where we're trying to collect all of the playing cards that we can, not every single one, but one from each person. So we can do a display. And so, because, some kids aren't going to get into old-timey costumes, and they're not going to get into maybe an airplane, whatever. They might get into the sports. Fred Van Vliet's a big name,
Yep.
but we've had people before Fred. And so that would be a way to connect with that kid. That's one of the things you have to do if you're in a museum. You got to connect with all kinds.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I put this up on Facebook, right? This is Jerry Stallcup,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Your old football coach at Harlem.
Yep.
And Jerry was a professional football player in the early 1960s. And this is an expensive card. So, but his son donated it to us. Now we have a Jerry Stallcup, right? And back in the 20s, there was a boxer from Rockford named Sammy Mandel, who was one of the 8 world champions. And he was champion a lightweight for 4 years. Now, I don't know why they did this, but 1948, Leaf did a card, put Sammy Mandel on it. So we got that one now. So we're on our way. We're working any more, this is James Robinson. He's more, newer, but that speaks to me. Like I would think that's cool.
Oh,
and so that's something hopefully we could put up sometime later this year.
Yeah, no, that, and I think to your point, that is, just being able to, show different things over time of why it's okay to be proud that you're from Rockford. And being able to say that, there's been time where people who don't know the history, right, they don't know that at different time periods, Rockford was, seen as a place to go to, because of for work or for career or whatever it may have been. And so I'm glad that and sounds like you guys are intentionally trying to do it well, along this way, not just do it, but do it well, and for it to have longevity. So no, it sounds great.
Yeah. No, again, I was very fortunate. The interesting thing about this, the journey, because I was reflecting back on what, in 2019, when we sat down in 2019, I had just finished like 3 years with this company downtown, and the ending wasn't going well. That company's no longer in business. Everybody who worked there is kind of scattered, because it was a really strong team. And as I was like, the team was great. The execution just didn't work out. And it's like, at the time, I mean, I was talking to you like 2 weeks after this happened, and I'd already gone through one career change with the newspaper, which was really scary. So the second one, I wasn't as scared. But then, so, I launched this business to do alumni research and development for schools, and it was really taken off. But then in March 2020,
Yeah.
The pandemic hits, and the pandemic, hit me pretty hard because I was working for schools, and schools were all shut down, and their budgets, nobody knew what their budgets were going to be. So I had 3 school clients, and I lost one right away. And then all of my meetings, I had like 7 meetings set up with Sycamore, Blackhawk Tech. I was going to meet with all these different schools. Everybody was kind of interested in this idea. They all got canceled.
Yeah.
So now, I'm down to two districts, which wasn't enough to pay the bills. And I have no prospects for the future, at least, because who knows how long that was going to last.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a freakish few months, right?
Yeah.
Then I did get lucky in September of 2020. I got an email from the Harlem School District, which was one of my clients, and they said, "Hey, we're creating full-time substitute teaching positions, and we'd like you to apply." Because I was a daily sub. I would sub there 5-10 times a year, and I applied and I got it. And at the time, that was a huge deal. Now I'm going to have a paycheck every 2 weeks, right? While I can wait out all this stuff. The paycheck wasn't great, but they also didn't, ask much of you. I mean, I was a fairly, popular sub, because here's my speech. I would walk in and I'd say, "All right, I got stuff to do. So if you don't bother me, I won't bother you." Right? "Here's your assignment." The kids were like, "Can we get our phone out?" I was like, "Yes, fine, it's fine. Just leave me alone. I got work to do." And at the high school level, all you're pretty much doing is reading their assignments and making sure they don't stab each other.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I did that for 2 years, and I started this 3rd year, and I wasn't really sure what to do in the 3rd year because, do I hit the alumni stuff really hard? Because it was a 3-year grant. I knew by the end of the school year that they weren't going to bring us back next year.
Mm.
And do I hit that really hard? And then all of a sudden, um, this job opened up, and it was like 2 weeks later, boom, I was out of Harlem and here. I missed the kids. I missed the hustle and bustle. We only have 8 people on staff. It's really quiet.
Yeah, comparatively.
Yeah, where it wasn't before.
Yeah.
But, the Harlem thing was going to come to an end anyway. And now I've got a chance to learn a whole new set of skills.
Yeah.
I'm qualified to be a communications person anywhere, but this is different. This is director of development. So, we just finished our annual appeal. Now I've got to get out and get our schedule to people for sponsorships, because our sponsorships really fell off last year. I can range in a lot of different ways. Like I said, I've already been kind of helping out with the store a little bit. On the communications side, I'm more comfortable in front of the camera than our communications director. So I'm like, hey, I'll do any of that stuff. I love going back and talking to Laura Furman about different ideas on how to improve the museum, because I've got some. It's just, I have free reign to kind of get involved where I think it's necessary, because in a way it's all development, right?
Right.
We're trying to get our school day trips back. I've got connections in the amongst teachers, so if we get those back, then our attendance levels go up. If our attendance levels go up, then it's easier to apply for grants. So really, it all leads back to just increasing activity.
Yeah. Well, and right, it's all about those relationships, and the fact that you spent, a couple years working in the schools, you regardless if you were a permanent sub or not, you still have a mindset of what would be engaging for students, what would be of interest to educators to come out there. So those are all key things. I want to go back and you pointed out a couple things regarding, probably similar to myself early on in my career. When you have that first career ends, right? And at least for me, I thought I'd be doing this for the remainder of my life, because that was how my dad was. I mean, he worked at a company for almost 30 years, and that's where he thought he was going to retire. And the company closed the Rockford location. And so the last 5 years of him working was trying to figure out where to fit in, right? And so for you've had 2 different career / jobs that have just, because of not anything that you yourself did, but because of the industry's changing, or maybe the plan wasn't, fully vetted or whatever. How, what would you say for someone who has gone through it once, twice, or going through it currently? What would you say, reflecting back on it, what would you say that was most beneficial as you were not only trying to just keep your head above water, but kind of keeping your hope up, keeping, because you still had to go out there and kind of hustle, still kind of go out there and make yourself available. And what could Alex do for some company?
Well, it's a lot, but it's a lot like relationships, right? You lose that first girlfriend, and it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
Right? You're never going to get another girlfriend, right?
Yeah.
But then you do. Although I'll say Randy Roof from the newspaper, he married his first girlfriend. They're still married. So
Yeah.
that's and there's people like that, and they get a job out of high school or college, and they just stay at that one spot. But that's not the norm.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell my daughters when I do all this alumni work for Harlem and Hononegah, and now I'm doing some for Elgin Larkin, um, you'll see somebody who, had an ABC life, went to high school, went to college, got their degree, started in their career, stayed in that career forever, right? That's not the norm.
Yeah.
The norm is, they went to high school, went to college. Maybe it took a while to get out of college, or maybe they didn't even go to college, but they started a job. Then they tried a couple things. Then they went into a whole new line of work, right? And then they finally found their passion later. So because my oldest daughter struggled a little bit with it. She has she's still going to Rock Valley now because she circled away from school for a bit, and now she's more serious about it, and she feels like she's behind. I'm like, we got 50, 60 years left.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go to school for one thing and end up just doing something totally different and having to go back to school. So there is no norm. I mean, everybody wants life to be easy. And what I've learned is it's not. I mean, I thought I was on top of the world when I was 29, had no idea the trials and tribulations I was going to go through. But it's like anything. It's each time you go through one and you survive it, it makes the next one less scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my case, I needed some humbling, I think, and these last few years have been very humbling. My 2 years in the month or whatever at Harlem, there were times I was a para in special needs, and I'm in a bathroom while they're cleaning up a kid who had an accident,
Yeah.
and I'd sit there and be like, 10 years ago, I was talking to Barack Obama. This is different, but I'm not too good for that.
Yep.
I needed, somebody's got to do it.
Yep.
And I needed the job.
Yep. Yep. So if you, and that's 100% right. And so we talk about the hero's journey. That's what the journey is about in Campbell's work with the hero's journey, and that it is a circle, meaning it's not the straight line where you just check things off and do that. And maybe some people's lives may follow that, but in some area they're going to have some type of obstacle, some type of setback. Even if they don't share it on social media, there's something that may end up happening. What would you say, from the newspaper to the job downtown to the last 2 years, what would you say that you've learned about yourself that you wouldn't have learned if those setbacks would have happened?
My life is a lot more interesting today, just from all the different things I've tried and things I've done. I have a lot more experiences in life than had I just stayed in that one career, right? If I had just been a newspaper person for the rest of my life, I wouldn't have tried to launch like a card game, right? I wouldn't have, been in front of superintendents trying to sell something. I wouldn't have. There's just different all these different people I've met and things I've learned that I would not have learned if I'd have just stayed in the one career. Now, would I like to the one career to stay? Yeah, I do the math in my head. If the journalism industry hadn't died and I just kept getting 3% raises every year, then I'd be making over 90 grand this year and probably playing golf with bank presidents twice a week. That didn't happen. So, but most of us don't get that. And in the end, it's just a matter of, you got to get up and, you got to get up and make things happen. When bad things happen, don't hide. That's the big thing. When bad things don't happen, don't hide. Talk to people, um, reach out, because that's where the opportunities come. It happened again here. Basically I was at Harlem, and I was there a month, and I was probably going to let the school year, finish out the school year and have one more teacher's summer. And then somebody at the administrative level decided that one of the benefits we got, we weren't going to get this year. So I took a $9,000 pay cut in one day. And I was like, okay, well, the other three people were kind of upset, and I was upset too. But then I was like, well, I was going to leave anyway. So this just means it's time to leave now.
Yeah.
And I sent out emails to several people I know. And one of the ones was the executive director here I'd worked with at Transform Rockford a few years ago. And he said, hey, would you be interested in this? I would be more perfect for the communications role here, but we have a communications role person here. And so they didn't have that. So it's like, okay, I looked at these things, and it's, development is relationship based. And I have a lot of relationships, and I've learned over the years when to keep your mouth shut. That's, I think, one of the biggies. And I talk to my daughters about that. It's like, you don't always have to chime in. Even when you're right,
Yep.
if you think you're right,
Yep.
it might not be the right time to say something. In the end, I read a lot about Lincoln. But Lincoln's genius was he never made enemies.
Yeah.
Never made enemies. And in the end, those people that he could have made enemies with helped him become president.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I've learned a lot in the last 10 years. It's better to have people in your corner than so sometimes if something bothers you a little bit, maybe you should just keep it to yourself.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I think, again, kind of summarizing, right, it's
Mm-hmm.
developing those relationships when times are going okay, and continue, those, when there's setbacks, right, continue those relationships, not to be rescued,
Mm-hmm.
but about those, just the relationship piece of it. And I know there was more than a couple times that we had, went to Starbucks and had some coffee or whatever, and you were just throwing some ideas around and just trying to make something happen. And
Mm-hmm.
So perfect. Well,
Yeah,
Alex,
you were there when alumni engagement services were born.
yeah. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it's funny because I obviously now, with your prompting, I make sure that I follow the Harlem alumni,
Yep.
and that has been, there's certain things on there that if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't necessarily be connected or know about those other individuals that had graduated from there, so which obviously is an aspect of the point of that. So
The cool thing is I'm not abandoning the idea. I now have it makes for a longer day. I mean, in Harlem, when I was sub teaching, I would read a kid, hey, here's your assignment for the day, and then I'd start working on my alumni stuff. Well, now there's so much going on here that I get here at 8 o'clock, and I leave at 5, and then I go home and work on it some more. So not, that's one thing is learning, is how do I juggle all that together, and
yeah.
and then I'm learning that, but I'm not abandoning it, because it is cool. Public schools, 90% of America goes to public schools, and yet less than 1% of public school districts do any kind of alumni outreach, because it's not mandated by the state.
Yeah.
And so you got to convince the school board to pay for it. Hananiga has been the most receptive. I just got my 4th year contract with them.
Nice.
They're not worried about fundraising. They just like connecting and showing off the kids that have gone through there. Harlem, we've had some fits and starts and stuff. When I was working there full time, you're not allowed to be a contractor and a full-time employee. So now that I'm not there, I should be able to go back to do that as well. And Harlem's where my heart is.
Yep.
So I've got a lot of big ideas there that I want to keep going. Like I said, I would not have imagined that this would be my life, and it's going on a while ago. My God, I remember when I was 29, I thought I was on top of the world. That was 24 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
But one of the things in life, most people get humbled at some point,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and and this was, my 40s were tough.
Yep, yep,
And,
yep. Well, Alex, I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate your story. I appreciate what the relationships that you've developed, because it's based on that is why you're where you're at right now. And we'll never know how many people's
I
lives you're
hope
going to be impacting.
hope to be here a while.
Yeah.
I hope this is the one that
Yep.
I can ride for a while, because I really like this place. I love
Yeah.
history. I've
Yep.
got a lot of ideas, and it's going to be cool to see how this works out for me.
Perfect. Perfect. Alex, what would be the best way if someone wanted to reach out to you, reach out and find out more about Midway Village, or even get involved and become a member or a sponsor? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Oh, so my email address here is my first name dot last name at midwayvillage.com. So alex.gary@midwayvillage.com.
Perfect.
And my number here is 815-397-9112, extension 109. And I'm in the early stages here. So, Kevin, if you're looking to sponsor anything, I got a whole, schedule of events here. There's a lot of, I've got data on old sponsors. So, the next couple months now is going to be just me, reaching out to people and saying, hey, let's go have a cup of coffee. How do we work together?
Perfect.
In 2008, this place had attendance of 78,000. This year it's like 40. So we still have a lot of work to do to rebuild, to our pre-pandemic levels. And that's my job, is to get out there and see how we get people back here.
Perfect. Well, Alex, thank you very much for being on the show. I know that I'll be asking you to be on the show again, and I appreciate everything you're doing for the Rockford area. So
I'm starting a Midway Village time capsule podcast.
there you
So
go.
I'm going to bring in history people here to talk, and we're going to do it. It's going to be fun, because that's something I learned from you. Is just, how to use it to, just build partnerships or relationships that way.
Perfect. All right. As always, if Midway Village is a gem that we have within the Rockford area. So if anyone wants to reach out to Alex and hear his story and the benefits of his story about persistence and resiliency, that is definitely one of the things that Alex has learned along the way. And I think those gifts are something that each one of us could be reminded of. So as always, thank you for being here. Alex, thank you for being with us, and I look forward to being with you next week.